imagine this, cohort of young ones with some kind of rudimentary human rights training that we didn't have.
You unlearn your biases and you learn about people.
Help parents who have no skin in the game, have no opinion, have not had the nerve to have these sort of conversations with their friends, let alone themselves, to kind of help them navigate through this world that their children are very much in.
It's important to know why are some voices deliberately left out of the conversation.
Someone that is open to learning and unlearning and really putting that learning into action for the benefit of humanity.
Welcome to the Wisdom Project. My name is Rochelle Padiachi. The Wisdom Project was born out of coursework that I have completed through York University and the Department of Human Rights and Equity Studies under the supervision of Professor Maggie Quirt. My coursework focused on an independent study entitled Building Critically Conscious Global Communities. The project work looked at large global ideas and their translation at a local level. And at the center of my research was the Human Rights Education Classroom at the York Regional Police Community Safety Village. This is an innovative space that has been created by York Regional Police to target early intervention human rights training as a means to empower students through an upstream approach. And the work that has been done there is groundbreaking, to say the least. We have an institution that has traditionally been criticized for human rights afflictions, drawing in human rights thinkers, academics, innovative educators, community stakeholders into a created and dedicated learning space for human rights. The first question of a project is centered around grounding the learner, grounding the human rights scholar. What is meant here is to challenge our human rights scholars to be introspective. And in doing so, we are asking them to make connections on how they can apply wisdom teachings to their own concepts of human rights.
I think a human rights scholar is someone that embraces diversity. Diversity is all-encompassing.
I think one of the most important things is coming in to this learning with a critical lens, trying to really critically understand the global situations and what human rights means.
A successful human rights scholar is somebody who asks questions of the challenges they see in the world around them, always through the lens of human rights and equity. And I would often yoke those two concepts together.
You think about the most sort of basic way to describe any kind of a scholar, you think of just someone that knows a subject matter really thoroughly. But I think when you get into something like human rights and the scholarship of that sort of a field, I think that doesn't really do enough. I don't think it's enough to just be knowledgeable in a field, in a history of something. I think because it's something that we're always evolving and learning what human rights are.
Immediately what comes to mind is somebody who is willing to, somebody who has an open mind. And I know that sounds quite general, but when you're looking at human rights, you really have to see every angle, every aspect, every person's opinion, every side of the issue that you're dealing with. And you have to look at it with some type of diplomacy to make sure that all parties or all factors of that one issue will come out with a resolution that has a large amount of justice to it.
A human rights scholar is one person who would understand and admit that there's disparities in this world and work towards bridging that gap of those disparities?
Being self-aware and knowing where you fit in within this beautiful thing we call a world. Empathy is key. And just being able to recognize, not necessarily understand, but recognize the experience of others.
As a human rights scholar, you have to be inclusive and accept the ways of others, even if they're different from what you know, been brought up with, have been taught that there are other ways that people live, there are other ways that people be, and you have to have an approach which is not judgmental.
A successful human rights scholar is someone who uses both wisdom and knowledge to activate critical thinking and to innovate action so that every human being is able to realize their limitless potential.
The lens in which human security is commonly framed revolves around the main pillars of needs such as food, water, shelter, and gender security. But at the point of origin in aid development and security lies the greatest factor of influence, humanity. Understanding one's humanity within their environment greatly affects the nature and success of work in this field. And although humanity may be viewed by some as a trait we all naturally have, our world has proven time and again how politics, economics, and systemic structures can blur the lines of what constitutes the true nature of actions based in humanity. For the next question, we asked our community members to bring to light what they believe are the core foundations for a learner of humanity.
So for me, a learner of humanity has to be outward looking. They have to be humble in the sense that they acknowledge that they don't have all the answers. And they have to be open to seeing those possible answers and solutions everywhere. Nothing is discounted.
In order to be able to learn humanity, you have to have an empathetic nature, and you have to be able to look at the world in different communities as if you can be a part of them, or you can at least appreciate where they're coming from.
Being able to connect. Sometimes it starts with listening and then it leads to connecting with others. And connection to me is learning more about people's histories, learning more about people's individual experiences to kind of transform your own.
I think the most important thing is to start within yourself and unlearn your biases, being kind, being aware. And at this time, especially where people have no food, maybe they've lost their job, they're losing their homes. I think that's when you start thinking about what we have and how grateful we should be.
If we're talking about between human security and human rights, there's so much overlap. They're so similar, but they're distinct and different. It's understanding the nuances of how our world actually works.
A good learner of humanity is one who values people's freedom, people's safety, as well as people's privacy.
A good learner of humanity, I would say, has empathy and love in their heart.
So it's someone that's comfortable going beyond their own understanding and definition of humanity and learning from other people's perspectives.
I think, humanity is it's central to everybody, right? Like, how do you define humanity? Is it your humanness, being a human being? But it's more than that. It's more than just the physical attributes of a human. It's the appealing to your higher self.
Someone that cares, someone that's willing to appreciate and learn about all aspects of human beings all around the world, someone that is open to learning and unlearning and really putting that learning into action for the benefit of humanity.
I feel that a good learner of humanity would understand that they do not walk on this earth alone, and that the paths of people will always be different. I feel the learner would gather this sense of individuality and transform it into an attribute that can play a role in bettering their environment. And lastly, I believe the learner would be someone who perseveres through the process of unlearning, not for only their gain, but to ensure that the tool of transformative learning is passed down through their connections as they continue their journey through life.
Through my coursework at the Human Rights Education Classroom, the main focus has been to look at how large global concepts, such as human rights, human security, and human development, are translated at a local and community level. All of the large agencies that govern, human beings in the world, the United Nations in particular, have all stated the need for local community stakeholders that have a direct interaction with some of these, with human rights issues, to be sitting at the table as far as solution and implementation of new programming occurs. The Human Rights Education Classroom has been an amazing example of this translation. Students enter into the classroom, and through the work that has been done, the programming, the physical space that has been created, students emerge and have the opportunity to emerge as human rights scholars. From a wisdom teaching perspective, this civic space that has been created has been framed around learning. And we know that learning spaces are sacred spaces. And within sacred spaces, transformation occurs. A human rights scholar is
Loving.
An empathic academic.
Someone that is open to learning.
Filled with fortitude.
A human rights scholar is
Empathetic.
An essential part of the community.
Non-discriminatory.
Open-minded.
Inclusive.
a human rights scholar is
Greatly needed in today's world.
The Human Rights Scholars Acknowledgement was born of some coursework that I was doing with York University through the Human Rights and Equity Studies Department and through the Human Rights Educational Classroom with York Regional Police's Safety Village. And being an upper year student and ready to embark upon my next journey of learning, I somehow felt that something was missing. And before I took the next step forward in my learning journey, I wanted to find a way to ground the intention of my human rights learning as I moved forward. And I did feel something was missing. And I felt that I needed to ground myself. I felt the need to ground myself before I stepped forward. And the idea of this came through in, understanding that there isn't a lot of grounding of the person or the human being before you embark upon the acquirement of knowledge. And treating knowledge from a wisdom teaching lens, we understand that knowledge is not something that you own. It is something that you are granted access to. And with that knowledge comes a responsibility. So the Human Rights Scholars Acknowledgement is an attempt to ground the human being before one embarks upon the responsibilities and the knowledge that will be acquired on the journey of learning of human rights. The Human Rights Scholar acknowledges,
with the utmost respect,
that this field of knowledge is premised
on the lived experiences and traumas of the oppressed.
The human rights scholar steps forward on a journey of unlearning,
which carries a deep commitment and responsibility
to ameliorate and eliminate oppression and subjugation
in all its forms,
with humility, respect,
And an understanding of the interconnected natures of all beings.
The human rights scholar aspires
to purposefully engage
in transformative learning
that advocates the shared
and common humanity of all.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you gained a new sense of understanding on the power of wisdom teachings that live within your very communities.
Please follow us as we continue our journey in 2021, where we will continue to amplify and connect wisdom teachings as part of our goal of transformational learning within human rights education.
I am a human rights scholar.
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 A human rights scholar is me.